Alright, so in this chapter, it's titled Not the Stomach Flu, and we learn something about Liz that is pretty significant, and it really starts to shape the friendship of her and Marley. Not the stomach flu. The next day was Monday, the big day, the day of the presentation. I thought I'd be nervous, but I wasn't. I was excited. No more waiting. I was actually going to do it. I was going to talk in class. JT was waiting for me by the picnic table when Daddy dropped me off. Big day, he said. Yep, I agreed as I handed him his homework, which had 4 problems wrong, nicely scattered throughout the assignment. Last week Liz told everyone you were going to talk, JT said. Is that true? Yep. My voice didn't even wobble. I felt for the feather in my pocket. The magic was still there. I was ready. I could talk in front of 1,000 people. Well, maybe not 1,000, but 30 in my history class definitely seemed doable. Liz wasn't at school when the bell rang. The bus was sometimes late, so I didn't worry. Not until homeroom was almost over and Miss Taylor cleared her throat and said, Marley, would you step into the hall with me for a moment? The class froze. I stood and slowly made my way toward the door, everyone watching me. A month ago, I would have fainted dead away, but now I felt eerily calm. The feather was. I would talk about how she woke up, she was nervous, she was excited, and then, still in my pocket, Liz would be here any minute. What could go wrong? Miss Taylor didn't say another word until we were in the hallway. Marley, I'm afraid I have to tell you that Elizabeth will not be returning to Westside Junior High. I stared at her. I heard the words. I knew what they meant, but they didn't make any sense. Why would Liz leave Westside? Liz is very ill, and she... Miss Taylor paused. I'm sorry. I will give you a few days to write down your report and turn it in. She turned and walked back into the classroom, leaving me in the hall. The bell rang, and students swarmed around me, but I didn't move. I was a balloon that had been blown into a cactus. One pop, and all my confidence was gone. I couldn't concentrate in math. Mr. Harding called on me twice, and I didn't even answer. At lunch, JT and Sally and Nora sat down at my table. So what did Miss Taylor say to you? JT asked. I shook my head. She said Liz isn't coming back to Westside, reported Nora, peering over the top of her glasses. I was standing by the door and heard her. She said Liz is real sick, but I don't think that's true, because Liz was in school last Friday, and she seemed fine. JT thought for a moment. My cousin got the stomach flu last week. That can come on real sudden. Yes, but that only lasts a few days, said Nora. Liz isn't coming back because she's Sally said. We all turned to look at her. Sally flipped her hair to make sure we were all paying of the chapter attention. That's what my mother told the principal. They were talking outside the teacher's lounge. That's ridiculous, I said, but not out loud. What? JT sounded confused. My mother and I saw Liz last night. Sally leaned forward and lowered her voice. Way down by 9th Street. That was the colored part of town. What were you doing there? Asked Nora. Our maid, Sue Ann, was sick. We had just dropped her off at her house when I saw Liz come out of the Baptist church on South Chester. She was holding hands with a colored boy. You're kidding, breathed Nora. Sally shook her head. I was so surprised. I called out her name, and I think she heard me because she looked right at me. Then my mother saw her and recognized her from the football game. Mother was so surprised she almost ran into a lamp post. She wouldn't say one word about it all the way home. But first thing this morning, she came in to talk to Principal Watkins. But then, Sally continued, when we got here this morning, the principal said Liz had already withdrawn from school. She didn't even come by to pick up her records. When he heard our story, he said it all made sense. She must have been colored. JT shook his head. Last week, I even loaned her my hairbrush, whispered Sally. Ew, squealed Nora. I know, said Sally. Of course, I already threw it away. Can you believe it? JT said. At our school? I stood up, suddenly furious, but I wasn't sure at whom. JT, Miss Taylor, Sally, myself, Liz. So right now, scholars, I just want to take a moment to talk about this word and the language again in this book. It is the language of the time period. So unfortunately, um, people called African Americans names, and it was normal. It was normalized. Um, so right now, the author chose to include that language to really show the personality of JT, and even his brother Red. So you, as the reader, can get a feel as to what kind of people these characters are based on the way they talk. So keep that in mind. Begin for now. "Where are you going?" asked JT. My thumb was throbbing. I shook my head and ran out of the room. In the bathroom, I thought I was going to cry, but I didn't. I just stood in front of the sink and took the bandage off my thumb. I was careful not to glance in the mirror and see my brown hair and brown eyes that looked so much like Liz's. Could it be true? Can a girl be white one day and colored the next? So right now, my thinking voice is also going back to the time period where people of color used to pass as white, and that was normal for them if they wanted to try to um, go to a better school, such as Liz's case. So the answer to my question, or to Marley's question here, is back in the time period, yes, it was possible. It seemed much more likely that she was sick, or maybe she was moving. But if she were moving, why wouldn't she have told me? She said she believed in me, but how could she believe in me if she wasn't even here? The bell rang, and I splashed water on my face. I glanced in the mirror. My skin was the same beige color it had been before. Liz was the first person outside of my family I could really talk to. I couldn't lose her. It must be some big misunderstanding. When it was resolved, when she came back, I wanted the magic square book. I wanted to have earned it. History was right after lunch. Miss Taylor looked surprised when I raised my hand. "Yes, Marley. I want to do the presentation." My voice shook, but the words were clear. Miss Taylor was speechless. She just nodded and gestured for me to go to the front of the room. Everyone was silent. Every eye was on me. It took forever. Finally, I reached the front of the room. I pulled the black feather from my pocket and stuck it in one of my braids, like an Indian headdress. I took a deep breath. Nothing came out. I counted. 29, 31, 37, 41. Still no voice. So Marley, to me, is trying to get past her fears, um, because that's what Liz taught her. Liz said, if it's important to face your fears because it makes you a better person. She said that back in chapter 6. So Marley is wanting to earn that magic square book because to her, in this paragraph, we learn that she couldn't lose her. She still wanted to try. And she's trying and still no voice came out. To the number 5, finally, in desperation, I imagined them all in their underwear. It made things worse. In a moment, I was going to faint dead away. JT was grinning at me like a monkey. A monkey. Sally was stroking her hair, preening like a peacock. Nora's long neck turned her into a giraffe. A boy in the back row had his head down, sleeping like a lion. They were all animals. It was a zoo, and I started to talk. So why do you think that Marley started to talk after she pictured them as all animals? My my thinking voice is going back to how Liz and Marley practiced speaking at the zoo in front of animals. The Quapaw Indians were one of the tribes that lived near the river when the first French explorers came to Little Rock. The Quapaw had respect for all living things. After hunting, they would thank the animal that they'd killed for giving them food. I stood up in front of the class and told them how the Quapaw smoked the peace pipe with the Europeans. I explained how unmarried women wore their hair braided and pinned up, while married women wore their hair down. "Who did you marry, Sally?" JT called out, and everyone laughed. Sally turned bright red and stopped fiddling with her hair. Miss Taylor shushed them, and I went on, explaining what crops the Quapaw planted, corn, beans, and squash, and where they slept, on woven mats. Finally, I got to the last part of our presentation, the peach seed ceremony. Fathers were real important to the Quapaw, so if yours died, you had to get another one. Instead of letting the grown-ups decide, they let the kids choose. I held up the peach pit I had been clutching in my hand. It left a mark in my palm. I would go back to when JT called. If your father died, they gave you a peach pit, and you put it in a circle of all men. The man you gave the peach pit to would be your new father. I held up the pit, and all the boys started oohing and eyeing. "Pick me!" yelled JT. That had been my plan. It was going to be fun, flirty, but he called Liz that name, and now it was determined to pick someone else. Anyone else. I scanned the room. Little Jimmy was quiet and shy and bad at football. And well, I'm not sure he'd ever spoken to me before. I know I'd never spoken to him, but when I placed the pit in his hands, he looked up at me with shiny eyes, as if I'd given him a diamond. Alright, scholars, so now you are going to go to your chapter packet. Again, it's located in the e-learning general module. And you're going to answer questions for chapter 13. Number 1, ask you, how does Marley feel the morning of the presentation? And I ask you to cite evidence. Again, that is going to be real quotes directly from this chapter, directly from the pages I've read here. These 6 pages. Number 2 says, according to Sally, why did Liz withdraw from school? 3, why do you think that Marley does the presentation without Liz? So I would go back to chapter 6 and refer to the fact that Liz taught her that it's important to face your fears because it makes you a better person. That's what I would answer for number 3. And 4 and 5 talk about interpreting mood. So this whole chapter is about the mood of the novel. What's the mood of this chapter? Is it fearful, anxious, somber, lighthearted, serious, or suspenseful? You're going to describe the mood at the beginning of the chapter and cite evidence. And then number 5 is describe the mood at the end of the chapter and cite evidence. So if we were to Liz that name and she changed her plan. She improvised. And Liz not being able to talk, the fact that she was able to improvise and change her speech by giving Jimmy the peach pit is huge. That's definitely, I would focus on that for the ending mood of the chapter. All right. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Bye.